can I have a show of hands who has worked in a workplace that's failed to engage you? One where you hated having to get up to go to work, and while you're at work, all you could think about was leaving. Yeah. And hands up who's worked for a workplace that's engaged you really well, where you were excited to go to work, while you were there, you were creative, you were passionate, and you even did overtime just because you loved it. Excellent. So these are two very real and very different scenarios. And what's interesting to think about is, what are the contextual factors that contribute to that difference in motivation and behavior in both of those situations? My name is Kerstin Oberprieler. I'm Lead Gamification Designer and co-founder of PentaQuest. And as of about 3 weeks ago, I submitted my PhD in gamification. Thank you. Thank you. And that's what I'd like to share with you today. But just a bit of a backstory in case you don't know me. I've got a background in psychology and commerce. And when I was studying that, I had people saying, psychology and commerce? That's a weird combination. Why would you study that? And I always thought, what do you mean? People and business make so much sense. I then worked as a UI and a UX designer and as a design thinking consultant for 7 years. And as a little side fact, I'm a 5th Dan black belt in Taekwondo, and I've represented Australia. So as I was competing at a high level, I was always looking for ways of like, how do I hack my own behavior? How can I make sure I design my environment so that I can perform? And then as I was coaching, I was trying to do the same for my team. So throughout my study and throughout my sports career, I was always looking away for how to combine the psychology of an individual with the context or their environment. And so for me, when I came across gamification in 2013, it was like a light bulb went off. I was like, this is it. And so I designed a gamified experience for my colleagues at the time. So basically, I used my colleagues as guinea pigs. And I saw some really good results right away. And I just became really, really curious about what this thing is called gamification. And so I did some research and things, but I found none of the research available at the time was deep enough, which is why I decided to do the PhD. Like I said, I work for PentaQuest. PentaQuest specializes in gamification for teams and workplaces. So we do consulting and bespoke designs, and we also have a software as a service platform. We've run several awards as well, and you can see some of our recent clients there. So, coming back to the question I asked earlier, we know that employee engagement is really, really important. Many, many studies have shown how that employee engagement is really important for organizational performance. And in fact, it's been shown that organizations with high employee engagement outperform those with low engagement by over 202%. And you could say that employee engagement is the only source of competitive advantage. But only 67% of employees are not meaningfully engaged in their work. So we've got 2/3 of people being in that former scenario where they're showing up to work and then leaving as soon as they can. And this is true globally, and it's been true for the last 10 years. And now when I say engagement, I'm using the Towers-Perrin definition here of discretionary effort. So engagement being going above and beyond, contributing creativity, passion, and so forth. Now, the cost of disengaged employees in the US costs $550 billion a year. And the cost globally of the lost productivity due to low engagement is $7 trillion. So it's a massive, massive problem. Now, on top of that, when we look at how do we gamify in a workplace, workplaces are actually quite complex. So they're social and they're connected. And this is especially true in today's knowledge-based workplaces where we're connected 24/7. So I like to think of organizations like an ecosystem. And if anyone did the changification session before, this is a really good parallel. So if you think of an organization consisting of actors, so people, and people interacting with each other and interacting with tools, if you have a small organization, it can change quite quickly. But as you get to hundreds and thousands of tens of thousands of employees, the ecosystem becomes a lot larger and therefore takes a lot longer and is a lot slower to change. So in the last few years, gamification as a field, I feel, has matured and sophisticated, and we're on that trajectory now. And so we're getting a lot better at understanding the design process. We've got player profiles, we're understanding how do we map mechanics to motivations, and this is all really fantastic work. What we don't have yet is understanding how do we apply all of those tools into the living social corporate ecosystem. So in a nutshell, how do we, as gamification designers, make sense of this complexity in the workplace? So this is really what drove my PhD research. So I had 2 research questions. The first was, does gamification work? And does it work if it's tailored to the unique context of the workplace? And then second, does cultural historical activity theory, yes, it's a mouthful, we'll call it chat for short, does chat provide a useful tool for us designers? So I'll explain what that is. So chat actually has been around for about 100 years. It was pioneered by Soviet psychologists, and it was really looking at educational situations. And so what they looked at is human activity and human learning and consciousness as culturally mediated through artifact, tools, and languages. So essentially it's looking at how humans work together as a system. And to make sense of this complexity, chat theorists use this triangle model. So I'll talk you through it. So first we have the subject. It's kind of old terminology, but we mean the person, the individual. So in a workplace, this is the employee. Now that employee is working towards an object or a goal. So it could be delivering a project on time, on budget. It could be delivering great customer service. It could be making your boss happy. But there's a goal that they're working towards. And that goal is leading to an outcome. So there's a greater outcome that's being worked towards. So whether that's the organizational mission or the strategic objective of the company. So we have an employee, they have a goal they're working towards. Now, there's certain rules that govern how they go about this activity. So that's your policies, your procedures, social norms, unspoken rules as well. And the subject doesn't do this by themselves, they're as part of a community. So there's their colleagues, there's their customers, shareholders, stakeholders, the general public. The division of labour here is essentially roles. So within this context, you've got different roles. You've got your staff, managers, executive, you might have HR, finance, operations, and so forth. And then finally, we've got mediating artifacts, which is just a fancy word for saying tools. And so it could be physical tools like a computer or a phone. It could be soft tools like platforms or PowerPoint or whatever it might be. And there's also tools like language or symbols and things like that. So this chat provides this triangle model to help make sense of the complexity so that you can, first of all, understand the different components, but these lines in between the triangle actually helps you understand how those 2 components of the system are working together. So when we look at now, how can we use this to gamify in the workplace, we can actually visualize gamification as part of the system. So here, the subject or the employee becomes the player, the goal becomes the win state, the mediating artifact becomes the platform, and so forth. And so where this is useful is when we're doing the gamification design, we can actually visualize how the gamification fits in to that broader context of the organization. Okay, so that's a bit of a background theory. So for my research, I worked with 3 deliberately diverse workplaces: a school, a restaurant, and a government department. And what I did is I first mapped the system beforehand, so went in there, did exploratory research to understand the workplace, mapped it on the triangle, then designed and implemented a gamification experience for 3 months, and then measured it again afterwards using the chat model. And the intent was to gather the results, gather some insights, and understand how chat could be used as part of the gamification design process. So it's very difficult for me to to squeeze in 100,000 words of thesis into half an hour. So I'm going to give you a brief overview, but I'm very happy to talk to you in more detail afterwards. So the first case study was Shoalhaven School. So here the employees are the teachers. And what we're looking to try to do is encourage innovative teaching practices. Now, in this case study, and probably all over the world, teachers are very busy. They've been often teaching for a long time, and it's very easy just to do the same thing. And so what we're trying to do is encourage them to embrace new methods of teaching. So essentially looking at innovation and collaboration. So now when we map the system beforehand, now I don't expect you to necessarily read all of the information, but I want to draw your attention to the tensions, the red writing here. So there was a couple of tensions that we identified that existed here. Primarily, this group of teachers felt like they weren't communicating very well with each other. They weren't communicating very well what they were doing to the rest of the school, as well as to the parents and teachers. So this is the gamification design. This is a physical one, so this was a board stuck up in the staff room. And because we're looking at innovation and collaboration, and that requires courage, that requires the ability to fail in a safe environment. And so competition and individual rankings and individual points were not going to work here. So we've got 3 team goals that the teachers decided they wanted to work towards in that process. So the Facebook goal was to share with the parents what they were doing. The school times was their internal newsletter. And then the meetings was to share the innovative teaching practices with other teachers. So every week, the teachers would get together, talk about what had they done that week, and then they would fill in that progress bar so they could get this feedback. Another mechanic is this wall of awesome. So again, when we looked at what is the intrinsic and underlying motivation of teachers, is to see that aha moment in the students. And so we wanted to capture that. So essentially, whenever the teacher did something new, the students or other teachers would write on these little hexagons. So by the end of the term, this wall of awesome was covered with all these little hexagons and handwritten notes where the teachers could just walk past, take a moment to look at it, and it would, notes said like, "Hey miss, I loved how we used the 3D pens," or "Thanks so much for doing something different." And even though it's simple, even though it's quite basic, it was a really nice way for the teachers to reconnect with their motivation for why they started teaching in the first place. So, what did we find after the 3 months? So this is in the words of the teachers. They felt like the student voices could be heard. They felt it stimulated collaboration. It highlighted and acknowledged the work that they did. It authenticated tasks, helped them focus, gave them a sense of direction. And I really liked the one in the bottom right-hand corner. I was a bit skeptical in the beginning, but now I see it's really achievable. So that's the qualitative feedback. So now when we map the system, what's again good about the model is that you can actually visualize with color what the difference is. So you can see after 3 months we had increased engagement and motivation, positive team interactions, culture, productivity, communication, clarity, sense of progress. And on top of that, you can see that 2 of the tensions that existed in this workplace were completely resolved, and the other ones were reduced. All right, case study 2. So Ruby's restaurant was looking at staff engagement. So they wanted to increase customer service as well as the way that the staff just were engaged with their work. Now here, this was a bit simpler. You can see there's just 2 tensions here. One tension was just your general lack of communication and making mistakes in food and drink orders, pretty common to cafes and restaurants. And then the other one was a bias towards negative feedback. Staff here felt that they were only being told what they were doing wrong and never being told what they were doing right. So that was a really key tension that also affected the staff-manager relationship. Now again, because this was a restaurant, here a physical gamification experience made sense. Now this group of restaurant employees also were quite close-knit. They were quite friendly with each other, so they didn't want to be in competition with each other. So again here, no competition, no points, no leaderboards, but there are badges. So we chose 3 behaviours that we really wanted to encourage. So we've got 3 badges. We've got the Sunshine Badge. Sunshine Badge was for being friendly, smiling, giving good customer service. The diamond badge was for being cool under pressure. If anyone's ever worked in a restaurant, it's a very high pressure situation. And then the squad badge, which was for helping each other out. So now if you remember before, we weren't getting very much feedback. And so what we did here is that at the end of every shift, staff could nominate another staff member for a badge, so could the managers, but we also implemented a feedback card, which they didn't have before. So now staff were getting feedback regularly, they were getting it from multiple sources, and they were getting positive and negative feedback. And if you got 3 badges, you could get a physical reward as well. And along the top there, we had all of team goals, like average table spend and ratings on TripAdvisor and Dimmy. And we also had a wall of appreciation here, similar to the last one, where staff could write little notes to each other. So what did they say? So one is saying, it's just gorgeous to read through the comments, and the customer feedback worked really, really well. So again, now when we measured it afterwards, similar, increased engagement and motivation, positive team interactions, communication, better clarity on team goals, as well as better customer service. And the tension of negative feedback was completely resolved. The other one still remained because it's a sort of common restaurant experience. Okay, the last one is for a government department. So it's a federal government department in Australia. And they were looking at how do you increase professional development? How do you get staff, rather than having a scary conversation once every 6 months, how do you encourage staff to engage monthly, weekly, daily in professional development activities? So that was the key thing they were looking at. Now this one's a little bit different to the other ones, particularly because they're a much larger organisation and their employees were dispersed, whereas the other ones were more close-knit. So here I implemented a digital gamification platform that I developed for them. So I'll talk you through it quickly. So first of all, there was a range of professional development activities they could do. So it is things like your normal training, but also other things like reading a book, watching a TED Talk, connecting in with a colleague from another team, even those little behaviours that contribute to learning and performance. So when an employee completes that, they would get experience points for themselves, they get points for their team, and also redeemable points that they could exchange in for rewards. Now here we did have a leaderboard. They were quite used to being compared and contrasted to the other parts of the organisation, so this worked really well for them. And yeah, some other things there as well, dashboards and things like that. All right, so what did we find? They said it was useful to reinforce the importance of professional development. It made me read the policies more thoroughly. It's a useful way to motivate us, it was a nice interface, and this is the future of HR. So now when we map the triangle again, you can see that we've made progress on that shift, but probably wasn't enough time potentially to fully resolve that one. But again, increased engagement and motivation, communication, clarity on goals, and an improvement in the number of professional development activities completed. Like I said, very quickly going through those. So now when we compare these three, now remember there were 3 deliberately diverse organisations. What's interesting is that you can see across all 3 of them, we found the same positive results about engagement, interaction, communication and goals. In addition, there was the specific things that the organisation was looking to do, and importantly, that we could actually see that there was a difference in that workplace from that systemic tension point of view. So I think how chat fits in into the design process. So this is a gamification design process. You'll see we've got the 5 design step processes along the top, pretty standard, I think, to a design thinking process. Now the difference here is that using the chat and the activity theory model, we can do that in the explore stage. So when you're looking at who are our users, what's motivating, using that to really map the system. Then when you're actually designing the gamification experience, understanding how it fits together, and then again at the end so that you can measure the difference. Just giving people a moment to take photos. Okay, so now how does chat fit in with some of these other theories that are emerging in gamification? Now we're all familiar with self-determination theory, and that's a really important theory. It's a very useful lens for us designers to make sure that we are tapping into autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Goal-setting theory as well is one that's really emerging as another sort of cornerstone theory of gamification. And I think it's particularly important in the workplace because workplaces by nature are already working towards an object. So it fits in really well, and it's a really nice way to understand how are the goals within the game engaging people. And we've heard a lot about dopamine being released as you're working towards a goal. So these two theories I think are really important, and the difference is that activity theory is not replacing them. It's more like bookending them. So self-determination theory and goal-setting theory work really well in that design stage when you're actually working out which mechanics should I use and why. And cultural activity theory you can use beforehand and then afterwards to really help you map and measure the difference in the system. Now, activity theory hasn't been applied to gamification before, so this is pretty new. So I invite you to further the discussion, chat to me, non-pun intended, further the discussion, and let's kind of see where this takes us as a collective. And just a 30-second pitch for the company that's paying me to be here. The piece of software that I developed as part of my PhD is now a fully fledged software as a service platform that we're using with a whole range of different customers. It's won some awards and we have some really great results. So the way that companies are using this is for their professional development, for their graduate programs, inductions, aligning strategy with culture, as well as building capability like collaboration or innovation. You can see some really fantastic results from a range of clients. So if this is something you might be interested in, come talk to me. Okay, so my takeaways for you are this. When we're designing in the workforce, we need to be aware of the complexity within organizations, and we need a way to manage with this. And chat, cultural historical activity theory, gives us a way to do this. So it really helps us map and measure the changes that gamification is creating. And finally, in the spirit of this conference, the more that we are all sharing our thinking and our work, the better we all become. So I really encourage everyone to keep sharing and keep the discussion going so that we all can bring gamification into the future. Thank you.